Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. It's been a little bit quiet in the college football world. I think it's the calm before the storm, if I'm being honest. So, we're going to give you guys a little bit of an update show today. We're going to start talking about spring practice, give you some updates on who's standing out across the country. Then, we're going to get into recruiting, give you a little recruiting update, all the commitments, decommitments, and where some of the top guys are kind of leaning right now. Then we're going to get into the best games of 2024. We went away for a little bit from this segment, but we are back with Week 7 and Week 8. We have all the other weeks on the YouTube page if you want to check out those videos as well. But Week 7 and Week 8 are going to be tough to beat, I'll be totally honest. And then we're going to finish it off with another Spotlight Wednesday, and today we're going to talk about the Oregon Ducks. Obviously, a huge year for Oregon, tons riding on it. Dylan Gabriel coming in from the portal was a huge addition, and we will get into all of that and what I expect from them this season. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to see your question or comment on the screen, bring up something that maybe I had not brought up, and maybe we can have a fun back and forth here. But let's jump right in. Spring practice is in full swing. We are getting very close to spring games. Obviously, some have already passed, like Missouri, but tons on the way. These next couple of weekends are going to be absolutely filled with college football, which you gotta love, obviously. But I had kind of scoured the internet the last couple of days trying to figure out who's kind of standing out and who you should be watching for as we go into these big-time spring games. And let's start in Auburn, Alabama, and we'll kind of bounce around the country willy-nilly here. But we touched on him last time we did this, but Cam Coleman is incredible. Everyone down there is very excited about this kid. They think he is the next big thing in Auburn, and he's going to have to be pretty much because that wide receiver room is very talented but very young. There's Perry Thompson, also another freshman, in there with him, so it's going to be a very talented room, but Cam Coleman might have to be wide receiver 1 the second he gets onto campus, and he's proving that right now. He's just incredible. He's getting rave reviews pretty much every second of every day, it feels like. So someone that Auburn fans can be very, very excited for, and as long as Peyton Thorne can be on target, I think Cam Coleman will have a big-time year in 2024. USC might actually be the most interesting update that we have for you today, although the one after this is pretty interesting itself. USC might have a quarterback battle on their hands. We had thought that Miller Moss would be the starter pretty much this whole time. He started the bowl game. He did very well in that game, so there was understanding that he was going to be the guy. But Jaden Maiava, the transfer from UNLV, jumped in, and he has played really, really well early on in spring practice, and I think that might be the talk of the town on April 20th when their spring game is, because those two guys will be able to go at it head-to-head, and we'll be able to see which one we like more. I'm sure USC fans will have both opinions. I'm sure some will be big-time Miller Moss fans. Some people will be Maiava people. But at the end of the day, I think this is going to be a really fun battle to watch. I'd still lean Miller Moss's direction just because of his comfortability in the playbook. But at the end of the day, Jaden Maiava is making his presence known very, very early on in USC. And then let's get into Michigan, another quarterback situation that a lot of people are watching. Some people even thought they might go into the portal after the spring, but Alex Orji is standing out the way that Michigan fans were hoping that he would. He is doing everything in spring practice that a lot of the doubters thought he might not be able to. Mason Graham was giving him rave reviews, talking about his athletic ability and his ability to command the offense. So I think that spring game will still be very interesting. There's still a lot to prove for him, obviously, but I do think he is currently in line to be the starter. We will see what happens over the next couple of weeks, obviously. That could change very quickly up there. But another quarterback that everyone seems to have questions about this time of year is Cam Rising at Utah, and he looks like his old self. If you're a Utah fan, that is music to your ears, obviously. The last time that he was healthy, you were winning Pac-12 titles. So this obviously is a great, great sign for them. He's moving around the way that he wasn't able to a year ago. He doesn't really know what 100% is for him, so he's not really sure where he is because of that injury was so aggressive and took so much time to recover from, you're not really sure if you're 100% today is the same as you're 100% a year and a half ago. So he's still kind of working his way back. I think he will likely not play a lot on the spring game on the 13th because just err on the side of caution with him for the time being. Make sure that he's ready to go week one. That's the most important thing. But as of right now, it's all systems go for the Utes. So I think they feel very, very excited about that. Having their guy back is absolutely huge for them. And then let's go to Columbus, Ohio. We have another rave review about Jeremiah Smith, the young wide receiver coming in as a freshman. He apparently is not only carving out a spot to play on this team, but possibly even start. I thought he was going to be more rotational for them this year just because of the sheer talent in that room, but he's proving that he might just be the most talented of the group. I think he has just been remarkable during spring, and he's someone that is an absolute difference maker. If he can get on the field and be really effective while on it, it only opens the door for guys like Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate and Brendan Ennis to be more effective in their positions. So Jeremiah Smith doing everything that Ohio State fans were hoping that he would do in the spring so far. But let's go to Clemson. We talked about their wide receiver problem a couple of times, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be a problem too much longer. Bryant Wesco has been absolutely showing out as a freshman. This freshman wide receiver group is absolutely insane. We'll talk about another one here in just a second, actually. But Bryant Wesco coming on is absolutely huge for this team. We've talked about TJ Moore, another guy coming in that could be huge for them. We've talked about other guys in that wide receiver room, but they need an alpha, and if it needs to be a freshman, so be it. I think Bryant Wesco is obviously carving out his role there. I think he's doing a ton of things that Cade Klubnik likes, that Garrett Riley I'm sure likes, and if he continues to rise and can be a really go-to guy for Cade Klubnik, I think this Clemson offense can be very potent. It obviously definitely missed the mark in 2023. Cade Klubnik was not necessarily the quarterback that a lot of Clemson fans were expecting in 2023, but with Bryant Wesco coming out, with more guys getting more experience at that wide receiver position, even with someone like Bo Collins walking out the door, I think you have plenty of talent in that room for this offense to be really potent, as long as they can all put it together. But let's go to another freshman wide receiver that is making waves. Feels like there is people all over the country that are freshman wide receivers making waves, but down in Austin, Texas, Ryan Wingo is doing just incredible things. He is apparently carving out another starting role in a position where I didn't think he was going to be capable of doing that. I thought he was going to be more of a rotational guy. It's very possible that he starts as the Z wide receiver, which is kind of the off line of scrimmage wide receiver, and kind of like bigger, probably more of a red zone threat type of wide receiver. Him and Matthew Golden are currently set up at that position. Golden's a little bit more dynamic in that sense. He can move around to a number of different positions, but I think if they have those two at the Z wide receiver for this season, it could be a crazy duo, and then just open the door for all these speedsters to do their thing. So the Texas wide receiver room is looking the part thus far, at least. In Penn State, in State College, we have tons of guys standing out, and it's the exact guys that Penn State needs to. Abdul Carter is proving to be the dude. He made that switch from linebacker to edge. They kind of just gave him the choice because he's so remarkable, and he decided to move to edge, take over for Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac as they move on to the NFL, and he's playing the part. He's doing exactly what Penn State fans would expect and being an absolute game wrecker in practice. I think he is one of those guys that could be one of the better players Penn State's had on the defensive side of the ball in a while. I think he has ultimate ability athletically. Obviously, he can play linebacker and now edge. He can do a number of things, drop back into coverage. So he's someone that I'm watching in terms of just being an absolute game wrecker and taking this Penn State defense from, really, really solid to absolutely elite, where a lot of Penn State fans were a little bit worried after a remarkable season last year. They did have a number of guys leave, but it looks like that defense led by Abdul Carter is going to be really solid. And another reason for that would be A.J. Harris, a transfer from Georgia, a corner that's come in and had a big-time spring, which they absolutely needed. They had Kalen King walking out the door. They had Johnny Dixon walking out the door. So needed guys on that exterior of that defense to help them out, and A.J. Harris has proven to be that. And then on the outside of the offense, we had Julian Fleming, a wide receiver, come over from Ohio State, and he's playing the part. He's doing exactly what they needed him to do, fitting into that kind of that wide receiver one position. I think it's very possible that they will still go out and find another wide receiver in the transfer portal after spring. But right now, Julian Fleming is doing exactly what he needs to do early on in his time in State College. But let's go down to Athens, Georgia, and let's talk about this offense. I feel like we spend so much time talking about the defense around Georgia, and it's going to be plenty good. I think the defensive tackle position could be one that you see them take someone in the spring, but other than that, it looks like it's going to be solid. But this offense is going to be downright disgusting, I'll be totally honest. This O-line is on a totally different level than apparently everyone else on the team. They just look different. They play different. Obviously, tons of remarkable guys. Tate Ratledge could have gone into the draft and got drafted quite high, but he decided to come back to Athens and making his presence known early. Carson Beck is absolutely dialed in. He is someone that I tend to believe is the best quarterback in the country. I think he will be the no-brainer number one overall pick in 2025 because I think he's going to go insane this year, to be totally honest. It looks like the wide receivers are getting very comfortable. Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett, two guys they brought in from Mississippi State and Missouri, last year, are apparently becoming more comfortable at that wide receiver position. And then another transfer they brought in this year, Colby Young from Miami, is proving to be a big-time target early on. So tons to like about this Georgia offense. I think it might be the best offense in the entire country, if I'm being totally honest. But time will tell for sure. But Carson Beck right now is just cruising right along. Up in South Carolina, a team that Georgia will have to face at some point this season, Oscar Attaway, the North Texas transfer running back, is showing out early. He is proving to be possibly the number one running back there and getting the bulk of the carries right now. They're definitely going to be a run-heavy offense, so having him get off to a really good start and go into the season very confident is absolutely huge. And then finally, let's finish it out in Eugene, Oregon, and talk about the transfer news in Oregon because Evan Stewart and Jabbar Muhammad are finally on campus. Two guys that they absolutely need to hit on this year. We will actually talk about them later in the show. But both these guys, getting them on campus is absolutely huge. Evan Stewart from Texas A&M, a big-time wide receiver they need to hit. And then Jabbar Muhammad, the corner from Washington, another guy. They are filling up their back end with transfers. Again, something we'll talk about later. But Jabbar Muhammad might be the most important of the group. And then finally, I just want to get y'all updated on where we are at with all the spring games and everything going on there. We have tons coming up over the next couple of weeks, so let's break it down real quickly. So, spring game schedule, first of all, this upcoming weekend, April 6th, you have Clemson, Auburn, NC State, and UNLV. That's kind of just a personal favorite. Love Brennan Marion's offense out there. And then April 13th, the following weekend, you have Ohio State, Florida, UGA, Kentucky, Tennessee, Utah, LSU, Penn State, Bama, Miami, and Ole Miss. So that's when everything goes crazy. That's when everything really starts to happen and we get to watch all football all the time. And then in April 20th, it continues. We have Notre Dame, Texas, Oklahoma, A&M, and USC. Tons of things to watch in that one. Obviously, we talked about the USC quarterback battle. I will definitely be watching that game. And then the following week, we have West Virginia, Oregon, UCLA, Arizona, and Colorado. So some of the former Pac-12 teams in action that day. Tons to watch. Colorado will be a very interesting one. And then we finish it off. May 2nd is Wisconsin. May 3rd is Washington. An absolutely crazy late spring game for them. But very interesting, obviously, having the spring game after the portal closes on April 30th. We'll see what happens with those two teams. Definitely a very interesting thing to watch there. But we are going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about recruiting, give you another little update segment, take you through the world of recruiting, let you know where the top guys are leaning, and some of the commitments that we've had, and USC continues to roll along, so we'll talk about that right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about spring practice and some intel from there. And now it's time to talk about the recruiting world. There is so much going on in the world of recruiting. Feels like the last couple of weeks have really heated up around there. And one of the guys that we have been watching very, very closely over the last couple of weeks has been Decorian Moore, the wide receiver out of Duncanville, Texas, a 5-star, the number 3 player in the country. And you can imagine there are a ton of teams trying to push him to decommit from LSU. Currently committed to LSU along with 2 of the big-time offensive players in this next class, Bryce Underwood, the number 1 quarterback, and Harlem Berry, the number 1 running back, all committed to LSU right now, so they're sitting pretty in Baton Rouge, but a lot of people are coming after Decorian Moore. There are 3 teams that are really, really standing out. Oregon and Texas have been in this thing for a very long time, and I think Texas has been the team that a lot of people have pointed to as the biggest threat to LSU here, but also Ohio State making a very, very good push right now. He visited Ohio State recently, and like every other recruit that walks through Ohio State, was very impressed with Brian Hartline and the Ohio State program. So 3 schools definitely going after him very, very hard. LSU will do everything they possibly can to keep this guy committed, because if you watch any bit of his highlights, you can tell he is just different at the wide receiver position. I think he will be on campus in Austin for the April 20th spring game, so I think that will be a huge visit for Texas, and we'll see what happens with him. I think it's possible that we see a decommitment and then he kind of evaluates his options here, but at the end of the day, right now he's committed to LSU and seems relatively happy with that. Has not made any definitive statements, so I won't put words in his mouth by any means. And let's continue with the Ohio State train, because they were a team that popped up a lot when I was looking over some recruiting news over the last couple of days. And Brian Hartline, another guy that we just talked about that is doing his thing in the recruiting trail. He got Dazee Jones, a 4-star wide receiver, to commit to them over the last week, I believe, and he's got some big-time interest from some big-time guys. Jamie French, a recent decommit from Alabama. Ohio State is really zeroing in on. Tennessee is also another one to watch for Jeremy French. I think Ohio State might be out in front, but right now Tennessee is definitely pushing really hard for French's services, and it is no secret why, because the dude is an absolute beast. And then his teammate, actually, out of Florida, I believe they're from the Jacksonville area, Varnell Brown III, another one that Ohio State is after. If they can land him, possibly Jamie French follows right along. So this could be a package deal that could be great for the Ohio State Buckeyes if they can pull it off. And then another update on the Ohio State offensive side of the ball before we get to the defensive side. Jordan Davison, a 4-star running back that a lot of people are after. I know Texas was playing a big-time role in that recruitment early on, but it seems like Ohio State is making more and more waves with this guy. He's very, very talented. He is someone that everyone is going to be after, and Ohio State does a great job with running backs, and they obviously just hired Carlos Lachlan as their running back coach from Oregon. He talked about that a little bit, Davison did, and had big praise for him. Really, really likes him, loves what he does on the offensive side of the ball. So I don't think that hurts Ohio State chances at all. In fact, it might help them being able to replace someone like Tony Alford with another remarkable running back coach in Carlos Lachlan. So I think Jordan Davison sits very, very in a nice place, I guess, for the Buckeyes. And then let's get to the defensive side of the ball for Ohio State, because they have been making tons of waves there as well in the recruiting world. Tarvos Alford, a four-star linebacker from Vero Beach High School in Florida, has committed to them. Also, Deshaun Stewart, another four-star safety this time, committed. And then they got another one. London Merritt, a four-star D lineman, has committed to join the Buckeyes. So on the defensive side of the ball, they are doing incredible things out there. Obviously, Jim Knowles came up a couple of years ago, and things have felt a little bit different around Columbus, Ohio when it comes to defense since he's arrived, and the recruiting is definitely mirroring that. They're getting tons of guys that they're going to need in this next era of Ohio State football, and I think if they have the year a lot of us are expecting them to have, they could definitely build out that even more. So very, very excited to see what they can do, because this recruiting class for Ohio State is shaping up to be absolutely insane. And then we got a little bit more wide receiver news out of the state of Mississippi. Caleb Cunningham is a top wide receiver in this class out of Mississippi, and Mississippi State obviously are the two teams that are after him the hardest and are leading the charge right now. But there are tons of teams that are still after him. I believe he's visited Alabama, Auburn, a ton of different SEC schools. And it seems like one of the big things in his recruitment is going to be getting that last visit. We talk about getting the last visit a lot in the world of recruiting, because a lot of these guys, the lasting impression, you want the last word in this recruiting battle, and maybe especially in this one, because it sounds like Caleb Cunningham, when he goes on a visit, comes out of those very, very complimentary of those programs. Obviously, there's a ton of guys that do that, but it seems like he is heavily swayed during these visits. So someone like Mississippi State or Ole Miss, every single team that is after him pretty much will be pushing to get that last visit. Now, that last visit is well down the road, probably towards the end of fall, but at the end of the day, he is someone that we will be watching very, very closely throughout this process. I would be a little bit surprised if he were to commit anywhere throughout this process until towards the end, but at the end of the day, if he goes to a certain visit, falls in love with the place, it could happen. So Caleb Cunningham is a huge piece. I know Mississippi State, with new head coach Jeff Lebby, is trying to get as many offensive talent guys in there as possible. And then Ole Miss, you talk about that offense all the time with Lane Kiffin and all the things they're doing up there. Getting someone like Caleb Cunningham would only help their cause. They obviously have Trey Harris there at wide receiver, so good number of recruiting tactics that Ole Miss can use, but also a number that Alabama can use, that Auburn can use, that all these other schools that are after him can use. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how his visits start to kind of roll out. There will be some during the summer, I assume, and then some throughout the fall towards kind of the winter when signing day is. So whoever gets the last word here might be the one that gets Caleb Cunningham's services, but we will definitely be watching that very, very closely. And another team that has been absolutely showing out, we talked about Ohio State earlier, and now it's USC. USC has been all over the news when it comes to the recruiting world, and they absolutely need to be. We talked about Lincoln Riley and his culture change a lot, and I might do actually a segment about that and talk a little bit more in depth, but he's checking all the boxes right now. There is a ton of things to do. There is so much to change out there in Southern California, but right now he is looking like he is doing everything correctly, especially in the recruiting world, and that's where everything starts, right? So they got Matai Tuaga. He's a four-star linebacker out of San Clemente, California. Definitely a guy you're going to need for this culture flip. You need big-time linebackers that can come in and play right away, and I think this guy could definitely be one of them. They have been on the recruiting trail getting all the right commitments, getting tons of guys that they need. They also got a 3-star commit at cornerback from Treston Castro, so Lincoln Riley, as of right now, is putting his money where his mouth is, and there were a lot of people that were worried about his ability to kind of execute the vision that he was talking about all this time, but I think he's more than capable. I think he's someone that can definitely make this work, and not only make it work, but become a national player on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, which would be great news for USC, would be great news for Lincoln Riley, because I think there are some people out there that are really starting to doubt him, and this flip will take time. There's no doubt about that. So I'm sure the USC brass is going to give him, 2 or 3 years to really figure out, because it's essentially like he just got hired, because everything is changing around him and so many things are happening that he needs to happen. So it'll be interesting to see all this develop. Right now, he's answering the bell in recruiting, so you can only be happy if you're a USC fan right now, and then once games come along, we'll have a different conversation maybe. But to finish it off here, we had 2 big-time running back recruits, and then one of the best players in the country got a big-time crystal ball. But let's start with the running backs. Tory Blaylock, a 4-star out of Humble, Texas. It might look like Humble, it is Humble. Has committed to Oklahoma, and Keelan Deere is a 4-star out of Quitman, Mississippi, and he has committed to Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. So 2 big-time running backs off the board there. These running backs, we talked about Jordan Davison earlier, tons of really, really talented guys in this group, and Tory Blaylock and Keelan Deere are 2 guys that absolutely are at the top of that list. So great news for these 2 SEC programs. Oklahoma is going to need big-time running backs going into the SEC, and the Rebels have done a really good job running the ball under Lane Kiffin. Obviously, a lot of these big-time offenses get started on the ground. You see the fireworks through the air, but if you don't have the running game, you can't have the passing game. So huge news for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels, huge news for Brent Venables and the Sooners. But let's finish it out here with the top recruit that we have talked about in this segment, the number 2 player in the country, David Sanders Jr., the top offensive tackle in the country, an absolute beast. He is just insane, and he got a crystal ball this past week from Tom Loy, a national recruiting analyst from 247 Sports, to Clemson. So it looks like the Tigers are leading in that recruitment. Need guys at the line of scrimmage, obviously, for Clemson, especially with someone like Cade Klubnik, who is more of a pocket passer, needs a little bit more time to survey the field and make his decision. I think this is a huge recruitment, and especially with how Clemson is trending right now, getting as many talented guys on campus, especially on those in the offensive and defensive lines, are absolutely huge. So tons of stuff happening in the recruiting industry, tons of stuff to keep track of as we will go into summer. Obviously, summer is a huge recruiting time, and then the fall, everything goes absolutely crazy. So we will keep you updated as more things happen. There will definitely be a ton more commitments here pretty soon. Spring games coming up, which are huge visit times. But we are going to take our second break here. When we come back, we are going to do best games of 2024. We've done this before a couple of times. We've done week 0 through week 6, and now we're on to week 7 and week 8, and they are just incredible matchups in this one. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did a little recruiting update. We had a little update show for the first part, did some spring updates and then some recruiting updates. And now we're going to get into some best games of 2024. We have done this before. We're up to week 7 and week 8, and this is when it gets really, really interesting. I'll be totally honest. We have tons of games to talk about. And first, let's start with, excuse me, apologies. There we are. I got confused on the bottom ticker here. But we do have a ton of really, really good games in Week 7 and Week 8. But let's jump right in. Let's start with Week 7. And the best one in Week 7. Ohio State heads to Eugene to take on Oregon. This one's going to be intense. I'll be totally honest. This one is as big of a game in the Big Ten as you could imagine this upcoming year. I think both these teams right now I would put at 1 and 2 in the Big Ten rankings right now. And I think they are if you look at the Vegas odds for winning that conference. So this one will decide a lot. Oregon getting them to come to Eugene is absolutely huge. And one of the big questions I have for this game, I know Ohio State's defense can match Oregon's offense. I feel pretty confident in that. I think they have a ton of remarkably talented guys, obviously a ton of guys returning, and then Caleb Downs on the back end coming in from Alabama. I think they have so many guys that can counter this Oregon offense. The question is, can Oregon do the same? They have a ton of transfers. We'll talk about their defense here in the next segment, but I think the question is, can they do the same to Ohio State? It's going to be a remarkable run game from Ohio State this year, and I'll be really interested to see if they can pull that off. But this game I am just remarkably excited for. And then we have Ole Miss at LSU, another game that you might not be the top tier SEC game that we talk about in the next week that you might see down there, but Ole Miss at LSU is a huge game. I think both these teams have the ability to make noise in the SEC. I think they're going to be jockeying for position, and if they really want to make noise and possibly even make an SEC title game, they got to win this game, plain and simple. This is a game that either of these teams really, really need. LSU getting it at home is obviously a huge advantage. And then talking about the quarterback matchup, this is one of the better ones that we will see in the SEC, and it shows just how good these quarterback matchups are going to be all season. Garrett Nussmeier and Jackson Dart going at it. I'm very, very excited for Garrett Nussmeier getting his first starting reps. He is someone that I think is really going to explode this year, to be totally honest. And then Jackson Dart kind of exploded last year, but a lot of people are expecting a lot of things from him. So this is a game that definitely will define the SEC in a lot of ways. I think whichever team wins this game could be set up to make a late season run at the SEC, because obviously coming into this game there could be 2 undefeated teams, there could be 2 teams that are struggling to meet expectations, but as of right now I look at that game as one that could really define the SEC this upcoming season. And then another one that will always define whatever conference they are in is Texas versus Oklahoma in Dallas. Obviously, the Cotton Bowl, the Red River rivalry, and you gotta love it. It's the best rivalry in the game, if you ask me. Quinn Ewers is 1-1 in those games. We expect him to be off to the NFL after the season, so he's gonna want to win the last one, that's for sure. Oklahoma was able to get one from Texas last year when everything was rolling for Texas, really jumped on him. Brent Venables got a huge win in his second year. Brent Venables is 1-1 in these games as well. So a ton riding on this game. I think Texas is going to come in very prepared, very angry, but we'll see what happens. Jackson Arnold will be obviously well into his starting role at this point, and I cannot wait to see him step into that stadium for the first time and be under those bright lights, because it could get interesting very quickly. It is not like a normal environment. It is not like a normal game. So him starting in that game for the first time will be something to watch for sure. And for some reason, if he were to not start in this game, hopefully there are no injuries or anything, but if you were to go down and they need a backup, it could be Casey Thompson, which is very interesting because he started in this game a couple of years ago. I believe Steve Sarkisian's first year at the helm at Texas, he started for Texas at quarterback. So it would be very interesting to see a guy start for Texas and then later for OU at quarterback. Obviously, the reality in the new transfer portal world that we live in, but still tons of SEC games in this week to get to, and Florida at Tennessee is at the top of the list. There are tons riding on this game. Tennessee obviously has big-time aspirations this year with Nico Iamaleava at the helm, and I think Tennessee has not had very good luck against the Gators. They have really struggled in this series, won the last one in Knoxville, so have to be feeling good about that, and will likely have the more talented and probably the better record when we come into this game. But a lot can happen in these rivalry games, and we will see a lot of different things happen in this game. But the guy I'm watching, obviously, and the guy a lot of people will be watching throughout the year is Nico Iamaleava, the dark horse Heisman candidate, and I think if he is going to be that guy, if he's going to be in the Heisman conversation for real, I think this is a game he could absolutely dominate. We look at Jaden Daniels last year and what he was able to do against Florida. It was remarkable. It was one of the best single games that I have ever seen from a quarterback or from anyone on the field for that matter. So this is a game where if we get to this point in the season and Iamaleava is the talk of the town, he is the guy that everyone is pointing to, this is a game where he could absolutely light him up, and I would be very excited to see all that. But obviously, tons to happen before we get to that point. And then a really interesting Big 12 matchup, Kansas State at Colorado, Kansas State, in my opinion, is the top team in the Big 12. I think they have everything in place. Avery Johnson is a remarkable quarterback coming back for this year after Will Howard moved on to Ohio State. And Shedeur Sanders versus Avery Johnson is a really fun quarterback matchup. We might not be looking at that as necessarily the top of the list, especially in this week with so many great ones that we just talked about. But this is going to be a lot of dynamic plays, a lot of plays with their legs, making things happen off schedule. I cannot wait for this game, and I think if Colorado can make something happen throughout this year, this could be a huge game in Week 7 instead of a game where Kansas State should likely win and continue rolling to a Big 12 title. It could be Colorado, the one rolling to a Big 12 title, or it could be two big-time players in that conference going at it. So cannot wait for that game. Cannot wait for this week. I feel like Week 7 is, you get into the meat of the season. You get into all the different talking points and tons of different stuff happening around the game. And you start to realize who's who, right? Who are the contenders? Who are the pretenders? Who are the teams that are kind of standing out? But another little note here for Week 7, the ACC has a big-time week, and some of these games might not seem like big-time games, but they could really define the ACC in 2024. Syracuse at NC State is a huge one. Grayson McCall needs to get a win there, but Syracuse has a lot of momentum right now under Fran Brown, the new head coach. Then you have Clemson at Wake Forest. We've seen Clemson get tripped up on the road a little bit over the last couple of seasons. This would be a spot where that could possibly happen. Georgia Tech at North Carolina. Georgia Tech I've talked about a little bit as a dark horse candidate. North Carolina is the exact same. I think a lot of people are writing them off because Drake May is walking away, but still plenty of talent up there in Chapel Hill, and we'll be very interested to see what happens there. And then Louisville at Virginia, another game where Louisville should likely win, but at the end of the day, going on the road in conference play is never easy, so we will definitely be watching those games closely. But let's get to Week 8, because somehow I think Week 8 might be a little bit better than Week 7. It's very, very close, honestly. It might go to Week 7. I can't decide, honestly, now that I'm looking at it. But this is a remarkably good week, and it starts on a Friday for us. Florida State at Duke on a Friday night. This is another game in the ACC like we just talked about with Clemson and with Louisville. When you go on the road, it can get very, very sketchy, and especially in conference play. And Duke is kind of one of those wild card teams. They just hired Manny Diaz as their head coach. He's kind of implementing a new defense down there. Got Malik Murphy, the talented quarterback out of Texas, to come over in the transfer portal. So tons can happen in this game. And if Florida State's not careful, the Blue Devils could absolutely get him on a Friday night. But Malik Murphy is the guy I'm definitely watching throughout the season for Duke, but especially in these types of games. These are the games that are going to catch NFL guys' eyes, catch the eyes of scouts and coaches and GMs and all the people that you want to be catching the eyes of, but they will catch him for good or for bad. So he needs to be able to, at the very least, prove that he can, run the offense effectively, do the things that he can do, and show off that remarkable arm talent, because it is something to behold. But very excited for that game. I think Florida State is going to be walking to that game probably with a lot of confidence, maybe even undefeated, and then Duke could ruin the entire thing on a Friday night. But we will definitely be watching that one closely. And then you have Alabama at Tennessee, a classic rivalry, one of the ones that I like the most. You get the cigar smoke over the stadium at the end of the game, one of the best shots of the year every single time. And Tennessee got Bama last time they were in Knoxville. Hendon Hooker had a remarkable game, and they feel like they have the quarterback to pull it off again in Nico Iamaleava this year. So very excited to see this game. I think there is a ton going into this game, and one of the more underrated but kind of exciting matchups that we will see throughout this game is probably Caden Proctor making his way back to Alabama. It seems he will likely be at the left tackle position, and he will see a lot of James Pierce Jr. He is someone that I believe to be the best edge rusher in the entire country. He is someone that is a total game changer for Tennessee, and if he can blow up Caden Proctor a couple of times in that game, things get very interesting very quickly. So very excited for that game. I think Tennessee has the ability to definitely pull off the upset here, especially depending on how things shake out through the first 7 weeks for these teams. And then let's get into a little ACC matchup here. Miami at Louisville. This game is huge. It's kind of like the LSU Ole Miss game that we just talked about, but in the ACC. These are two teams that really, really want to make noise. Louisville obviously coming off a season where they made tons of noise. Miami still building under Mario Cristobal, but if you want to make noise in the ACC, if you want to make that title game, both these teams are going to need to win this game, and obviously both teams cannot win this game. So one team's going to come away with it. Louisville getting this one at home is absolutely huge because it gives them the chance to continue the run they started last year and get a big-time win over Cam Ward and the Hurricanes. But this one's going to be a lot of fun. I think it will really define the ACC. I really like Florida State and Clemson, but these are the two teams right under them that could make some big-time noise, and if you're going to do it, you got to win that game. So it'll be very interesting to watch that one. And then South Carolina at Oklahoma. This one's really interesting because there's a ton of talking points. Shane Beamer going against his old team was the OC at Oklahoma for some time, and then Brent Venables using a little bit of that Clemson hate against South Carolina. I'm sure he still has some of that pent up, so he will have no trouble getting hyped up for this game. And Jackson Arnold needs to roll in this one. If he's the starter, if he's the guy going into this game, this is one that he needs to show his ability, show his upside, and not necessarily, dice up the South Carolina defense by any means, but really have a good day and show his ability and show his, where he can go. He doesn't necessarily need to be perfect next year, nor do I think he will be, but this is a game where he should be able to kind of flex his muscles and show what he's really about. So very excited for this one. And then let's get to the main event. Well, actually, before we get to that, let's talk about the SEC this week in Week 8 because there are tons of big-time games. We already talked about Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Oklahoma. We'll get to a big game here in a second, but we have Auburn at Missouri. We have Kentucky at Florida, LSU at Arkansas, and Texas A&M at Mississippi State. So tons of games that are very important for these teams, whether it's a team going on the road in a game they absolutely win, or like Missouri hosting a team that is very dangerous in Auburn, and you got to win that one. But let's get to the game that is going to define this week and maybe just define this entire college football season. Georgia at Texas. This is the game, not of the week, but of the year, in my opinion. I think this is going to be a game that everyone is looking forward to. This is the game between the team that I grew up being a fan of in Texas and the school I went to in Georgia. So it'll be an interesting evening for me, that's for sure. But I think this game is just going to be remarkable. If both of these teams walk in undefeated, which is going to be really tough. Georgia has Bama, I believe, before this. They have Clemson before this. Texas has Michigan and Oklahoma before this. So it's going to be tough to get there undefeated. But if they do, and both these teams have the capability to do that, Georgia will be 1, Texas will be 2. I feel very, very confident about that. You will get Carson Beck against Quinn Ewers. You will get Steve Sarkisian against Kirby Smart. You will get everything you could possibly want out of this game. This is going to be a remarkable atmosphere, 2 remarkable offenses, some real talent on defense on both sides of the ball. This one's going to be insane. Pretty much any way you cut it, any way we get there, I think this game is going to be awesome. I think if we do get there with 2 6-0 teams, we could be having a lot of fun, that's for sure. But we will have to wait a little bit for that one, but very, very excited. And I think this is going to be the game that we look back on in this season and say that was the game of the season, whether it's playoff or otherwise. But that will do it for this edition of the best games in 2024. Tons of remarkable games in Week 7 and Week 8. The real meat of the season when we get into the big-time games, figure out where everyone stands for the season. But we're going to take our final break here. When we come back, we have another Spotlight Wednesday for you, and we're going to talk about the Oregon Ducks. A lot riding on this year for Dan Lanning and the Ducks, so we will talk about them and what to expect from them when we get back from this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the best games of 2024, as you can see, and now it's time for a Spotlight Wednesday, and we're going to talk about the Oregon Ducks today. Dan Lanning has been laying foundation in Eugene for the last couple of years. He has been doing incredible things on the recruiting trail, in development, and putting together this roster the way he likes it. And now it's time to execute. They were very, very close to executing last year. They were a couple of plays away from the playoff a year ago, but at the end of the day, those plays were not made. So this year is a big-time year for them. There is a ton riding on him, and they can do any number of things. So let's jump right in. Let's break down their offense, their defense, their schedule, and then get to kind of what I expect from them. And let's start with the offensive side of the ball. So the quarterback room we actually talked about yesterday when we were ranking position rooms because it's the best quarterback room in the entire country. Dylan Gabriel, in my mind, is the most important and impactful transfer in the country. Maybe not the best player in the transfer portal, but definitely can be the most impactful for this Oregon team and for the Big 12 or Big 10 as a whole, because Oregon's going to be a big-time player there. And then you add someone like Dante Moore. He's not far off in terms of being super important to that team, because losing someone like Bo Nix is not easy to replace. But replacing him with two guys where if one goes down, you're not too worried about putting the other guy in there is a luxury that not a lot of teams have across the country. I think Texas would tell you they feel very confident about putting Arch Manning out there. I think Georgia would tell you they feel comfortable with Gunnar Stockton. There are not many others. Ohio State, I think, would feel comfortable with Devin Brown, but there are not a lot of quarterback rooms that would be as comfortable, or probably none, than Oregon. And then let's get to this wide receiver room, really just this receiving room in general. Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart is a terrifying duo for any defense, for any back end. This group is going to be just insane, and I think they will play as big of a role in this Oregon run as anyone. And then you add someone like Trayshawn Holden, who is a transfer from Bama, who had a really kind of an up and down year, made some big-time plays last year, can definitely be their big-time player in this upcoming year, and won't have to play too big of a role with those two guys in front of him that are going to be the mainstays of this offense. And then you add someone like Terrence Ferguson at tight end. He can be incredible this upcoming year, and Dylan Gabriel will have plenty of players to throw to, plenty of weapons to play around with, and it's about as good as you could possibly hope for if you're an Oregon fan. And then the running back room is very, very solid. Not quite as talented as a year ago with Bucky Irving and Jordan James, but Jordan James is still on campus, which is absolutely huge. You have someone like Noah Whittington to add depth there. Obviously, losing Bucky Irving is huge, especially in the receiving game. I think he was a huge player for Bo Nix in terms of just dump it off to Bucky Irving, let him get 6 or 7 yards and keep the drive alive type of thing. So someone will have to be that for Dylan Gabriel, I think, and it could very well be Noah Whittington. I think Jordan James is going to have a huge year, a little bit more of a running back than a receiving back, but is plenty capable of doing both. So very excited to see those guys. I think this is somewhat underrated running back room and could really take the world by storm, especially someone like Jordan James. And then let's get to the position room that all this rides on, that everything in pretty much every offense across the country rides on, which is the offensive line. We talk about them probably not enough, to be totally honest with you, but you got someone like Josh Carnley Jr., a fantastic player that keeps getting better, is a little bit young still, but is still working into form at that left tackle position. You add Matthew Bedford, a transfer from Indiana, who is slated to start, was absolutely huge pickup in the portal. Obviously, losing people like Jackson Powers Johnson, a fantastic center, and Stephen Jones is going to be very tough, but I think they have plenty of depth, and I think they're slowly getting more talented with the younger players that are coming in. We've seen that flip in an offensive line over at Texas over the past couple of years, and I think Oregon's doing something very similar, as is Miami down in Coral Gables, I think. So I think this offensive line room will be plenty talented, will be plenty good, and as long as they can give Dylan Gabriel time, he will dice up defenses, I can promise you that. But let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball. And this is a transfer show. I'll be totally honest with you. There are a couple of big-time players coming back for them, but they brought in a ton of transfers that are going to need to hit for them to be the big-time defense that Dan Lanning absolutely wants out there in Eugene. But let's start up front, and let's start with who I think could be the most important transfer and maybe the most impactful, Jamari Caldwell from Houston, a defensive tackle. He is going to be huge for this team. He was an absolute game wrecker, and Houston was great in the run game, and they're going to absolutely need him. He's paired up with Amari Washington in the middle, a good duo, so they definitely are going to need to show out. I think Caldwell is someone that could definitely even be a Big Ten, all Big Ten selection, even in the preseason and definitely after the season, because he's an absolute game changer, and I think he could be someone that Oregon fans are very, very happy they got in the portal. Edge rushing, in my opinion, is where this season will be defined for Oregon, somewhere where they've kind of struggled a little bit in the past, but Mateo Uiagalelei, the brother of DJ, is up there going into his sophomore season, only going to become more talented, and he's already pretty talented. And then you talk about someone like Jordan Birch, who's making his second season in Eugene, transferred over from South Carolina after his freshman year, was a 5-star coming out of high school, so plenty of talent for sure, but definitely has not hit the heights that he would like. And then you have someone like Elijah Rushing, a freshman coming in. I think all three of those guys could make big-time impacts, and they're really going to have to, because you got to get to the quarterback, especially in the Big Ten when you're going to play so many good defenses, so many good offensive lines. You got to have some difference makers at the edge rushing position, so I think that's where Oregon's season is really going to be defined. The linebackers are somewhat of an interesting group. I think Justin Jacobs is going to step into a starting role this year after being kind of rotational last year. I think he needs to and could take a big step forward, but Jeffrey Bassa is the guy that I'm watching at linebacker. He is someone that I really do think could be one of the top linebackers in the country, has remarkable ability, will definitely be the headset guy for this defense and the leader of this defense, so he is super important to Oregon, especially with all of these transfers coming in. Being the communicator, being the leader that he has to be is going to be very important for the Ducks as they go into the summer and then into the 2024 season. And then the back end of this defense is where the portal additions really, really show up. I talked about Jabbar Muhammad earlier, the Washington transfer at corner. You have another guy, Cam Alexander, a UTSA transfer at the other spot in corner, and then Brandon Johnson, a Duke transfer at nickelback. And just for fun, they added Kobe Savage, a safety transfer from Kansas State, on the back end. So it looks like they're going to start 4 different transfers on that back end of that defense, and I have very few questions about the ability of those 4 guys. I think they're all remarkable talents. Kobe Savage is a guy that I've been able to watch a good bit in the Big 12, and he's someone that I think is going to jump off the page. Brandon Johnson, another one that is just remarkable during his time at Duke, so very excited to see both those guys play. Cam Alexander I know a little bit less about, but I trust Dan Lanning when it comes to evaluating defensive talent, so this group is very talented, but playing as a group will be the biggest thing for them. You got to play as a unit. You got to play as 5 guys together. So it'll be really interesting to see all of that develop, and I cannot wait to see how this defense comes together, because they're going to have to hit on a lot of guys. But it seems like they have a ton of talent in that room, and as long as Dan Lanning can get a good bit out of Jamar Caldwell, out of Jabbar Muhammad, out of Kobe Savage, out of all these guys that he's brought in, I think they're going to be a big team to be reckoned with. And then finally, let's get to the schedule, because as we know in college football, especially with this no division world that we live in now, the schedule can define a lot. So they should roll through their non-con schedule the first 3 weeks of the season. They do play Idaho. Boise State is a little sketchy, I'll be totally honest. I think that team could be very interesting when we come around to week 2 of the season, but I'll put that down as a win for the time being. And then they have Oregon State. They have set up that game for the next 2 years. I think they should likely win that game pretty comfortably. Oregon State lost a ton of guys to the portal, so I don't necessarily expect them to be rolling very early on in the season. So they should be rolling, Oregon, that is, should be rolling through for the first 3 weeks, and then they do get a bye before jumping into conference play. And conference play starts off very nice for them. They actually don't leave the West Coast until October 19th when they go to West Lafayette, Indiana to take on Purdue. Before that, they have a game at UCLA, so get to stay on the West Coast. Don't have to travel too far to start your Big Ten play. And then you have Michigan State and Ohio State coming to Eugene. We talked about that Ohio State game earlier. Going to be a huge game for them. They definitely, if they can win that one, they're going to be making waves all over college football. So very excited to see that. But this is a huge stretch for them. If they can go 4-0, or if they can even go 3-1, which they likely should against everyone but Ohio State, they'll be in a great position in the Big Ten moving forward into the back end of the season. And it's kind of a back and forth in the back end of the season between tough fights and ones they should likely win. They start with a one they probably should win with Illinois at home. Then they head to the Big House against Michigan, which can get very sketchy very quickly the first time they go to the Big House, the first time they really go to a big-time Big Ten stadium for the first time. So it'll be really interesting to see how they handle that, how everything goes for them there. I do tend to believe that they are a better team today than Michigan is, but a lot can change before that game happens. Getting them late in the season especially is not ideal for Michigan, because I think they might start the season a little bit slower than they'll finish it. I think they'll finish it relatively strong. They then get Miami at home, which again should be a win. And then they go to Camp Randall, and that one gets really, really interesting. Although, going back to the Maryland one really quickly, that one could get very interesting. Mike Loxley is a very good offensive coach, and if they're not paying attention or looking forward to that Wisconsin game or licking their wounds from that Michigan game, they could definitely get upset by the Terrapins. But let's get back to Camp Randall and Wisconsin. That is a game that I'm watching for the same reasons I'm watching Michigan in the Big House, a environment that they will not be used to, that will be off the walls that day, and it'll be interesting to see how they handle all that. I think it's going to be very interesting. These Big Ten stadiums are very different than Pac-12 stadiums. They are a little bit rowdier across the board, and I think Camp Randall is towards the top of that list. So Wisconsin's definitely a dangerous game, slowly getting things under control there if you're Luke Fickell, and I think Oregon's going to have to be on full alert for sure going into that game. And then finally, they do get their second bye kind of late in the season here, and then they go to Seattle to play Washington. I think that one's going to be very interesting. Tons of energy coming from the Oregon side, I'm sure, in that game, because going 0-2 against a team leaves a sour taste in your mouth, that's for sure. So I think they will be coming into that game with a ton of energy. Washington will know much more about them by that time, but Will Rogers likely at the helm there. You have Jed Fish coming in from Arizona, so a lot of unknown, but we will definitely know much more about that game when it comes around. Right now, I like Oregon to win, but tons can change, so we'll find out later on. But all things considered, this is a very doable schedule. Going into the Big Ten, you were going to have a tougher schedule. You were going to have the Michigans and the Ohio States of the world, but avoiding Penn State, not having to play some of these games on the road, especially Ohio State, is absolutely huge. I think they can do any number of things this year. They could absolutely take the world by storm. They could beat Ohio State at home, win the Big Ten in their very first year, and win a national title. All of those things are totally on the table for Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks, and I think they have a ton of things in place. They are going to have to hit on transfers from Dylan Gabriel is obviously the most important. Evan Stewart, another one on that offensive side of the ball. But the defense, as we talked about, is littered with transfers, especially in that back end. So they're going to have to hit. And it's really a questionable proposition every single time that you get into the season. So it'll be really interesting. Everything is on the table for this team. They could win a title. I could see them losing 4 games as the Big Ten physicality kind of gets to them. Maybe they have an injury or two, or maybe these transfer guys just don't hit. So I tend to believe that the win a title, win the Big Ten route is more likely than them falling off a cliff in 2024. But I do think this is a team that can do any number of things. Very, very excited for this team. I think the transfer additions will be the number one thing to watch for sure. But I think Dan Lanning has it rolling. He has the team that he wants, or at least much closer to the team that he wants up there in Oregon. And we saw it last year with Texas putting it together in year 3 under Sark. I think Oregon could put it together under year 3 in under Dan Lanning in year 3. So very excited to see that. But that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for so much content and updates. We have people covering every sport you could possibly imagine, from basketball to baseball to wrestling to everything. So obviously it's March Madness time. My guy Nelson over on the basketball podcast has you covered there. If you're a wrestling guy, my guy Eric has you covered on the wrestling podcast. So tons on this page. Definitely follow on all of the social pages and follow this YouTube page as well for all of the updates. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go.